Hi. So today I wanted to talk about this book called Nehru, Tibet and China, which is written by A.S. Bhasin. Now, A.S. Bhasin worked in the Department of Foreign Ministries and thus he had access to enough documentation about the Indo-Chinese conflict in order to convert it into a book. And so he did. Also, it was recommended in Palki Sharma Upadhyay's many book recommendations on her social media handle, and that's what got my attention, and I chose to read this book. And also because I had little to no knowledge about the Indo-Chinese conflict, how it got initiated, the actual conflict, and the aftermath. And that was the reason, also the reason why I chose to read this book. It is quite interesting and ironical to note that how the title of this book is Nehru Tibet in China and not India Tibet in China. I understood this hidden meaning of the title when I finished almost more than half of the book. Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, ran a somewhat democratic dictatorship, and it was his say or nothing, even in matters relating to the highest national importance, even in matters relating to trade, defense, and the press. Plus, according to this book, his ministry had a few people who were true critics to the prime minister when his decision making became somewhat dichotomous or foggy, which was most of the times. This book beautifully weaves together the relationship between China and India immediately post independence of India, and at the same time when the China became a communist nation from a past imperialistic rule, and this one-sided friendship between Nehru and China and the downslide of it, which resulted eventually in a war which never ever recovered that complicated relationship for the better. All thanks to this one man army of Nehru and his one-sided propaganda of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, into which our entire nation put faith into and was eventually betrayed by this single man and his crazy fanaticism with China. One can say that this book puts the information in a chronological order on the diplomatic and the political relationships between India and China, and the goodwill shown to China by India, specifically Nehru, and how this goodwill was never ever reciprocated back by China, but it was put to use. They enjoyed it and finally betrayed India by capturing unethically some of its borders by bringing on a full-fledged war. As this book is exclusively based on the political and the diplomatic turmoil between the three nations of India, China, and Tibet, it never ever shows the personal side of the world leaders and the Indian politicians specifically. And for some readers, that may dry things up, no spice in the book, and so boredom is very very frequent while reading this book. In this vast network of what went down the history, the author has quite intellectually pinpointed certain things which led to the final picture, the final blowout, without ever sidelining from the main point on which the whole book focuses on. This book gives an unbiased take on those leaders who were politically involved in the three countries and the mashup they created between themselves, especially Nehru, Dalai Lama, and Mao Zedong. But at the end, the book just crashes it all down on the head of one man, and rightfully so, on Nehru, without even being single bit sympathetic towards him. This book is a classic example of how a neutral side can turn things dark very quickly between India and China, and that was Tibet, which was like a low hanging fruit between both these countries, and how it twisted the fate of both these countries and the relationship between them by just involving itself into their conflict. This book also puts all the sides of all the nations and all the leaders unbiased towards the reader. For example, the change in the government of China from imperialistic rule to the communist one, and how this led to the change in the thought process drastically and overnight, and how the later China viewed India as a product of an imperial rule of over 200 years and nothing more than that, and how it never reciprocated the goodwill that India constantly threw itself upon China, and even offered a seat to China at this UN Security Council, and even never thanked India for it. Tibet is a classical example of a neutral side being involved in a whirlwind or a snowstorm and being engulfed by it by a bigger nation, which was China in this case. How later it enjoyed that privilege of India being silent on that Tibet issue and began unethically capturing tiny little unclaimed undefined borders which were neither on this side neither on that side, and even built a road in the Aksai area which was undefined at that time. Though this book is of serious tonality throughout, the ironies and euphemisms and the false illusions which Nehru easily fell prey to are the most popular highlight for me of this book. How a single man became a beacon of hope to a newly free country, and how he had decided to strangle that trust of his country's people by just throwing things under the carpet. This book is a history lesson for us of how things got bad towards between two ancient civilizations just because they had no clear discussions whatsoever on a specific topic, and how that can lead to disasters and nothing else.